dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all. If you fail to prove us wrong, God help us.
Gravitas tells you stories which others won't. And tonight we will tell you about this new strategic map that is being drawn.
They say your enemy's enemy is your friend. Is that the foundation of the new defense bridge between India and America?
This is what separates us from others who claim to be telling you global stories that matter. In the last 3 days, WION has been traveling across Syria. You are in Latakia city right now. Tell us, what is the situation on ground? At Gravitas, we don't just tell you stories from selected countries from around the world.
2 years since the Myanmar military coup, the people of Myanmar continue to live in a nightmare.
Because it does not suit their propaganda or because they are too scared to speak truth to power.
For Ukraine on the way to NATO, an important package of security guarantees. Today, we are coordinating with the G7 countries the framework for security guarantees that shall be further extended through arrangements with our key partners, bilateral and multilateral agreements, and Ukrainian delegation is bringing home significant security victory for the Ukraine, for our country, for our people, for our children. It opens for us absolutely new security opportunities, and I thank everyone who made it possible. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thanks you, thanks Lithuania and Jens Stoltenberg. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
This concludes the speaking program. Please remain seated for the family photo.
Launching a joint declaration of support for Ukraine to make it clear that our support will last long into the future. This starts a process by which each of our...
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Tehrani in New York City. As we're listening to the leaders of NATO at the summit speak, we're going to open up our news broadcast regarding that same story, where it's an action-packed day. Day 2 of the NATO summit. Ukraine continues to dominate discussions among world leaders at the meeting, as it dominated, as we saw just a few minutes ago as well, where world leaders were speaking. This is being held at Lithuania's capital city of Vilnius. The alliance has not extended an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO as of yet. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke at a joint press conference with NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg. The latter announced a package which will bring Ukraine closer to the alliance. The NATO chief indicated that the roadmap to Ukraine's membership has become quicker and easier. This is what he had to say.
Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. Allies reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan.
Stoltenberg said that the 31-nation bloc has agreed to a NATO-Ukraine Council to tighten cooperation. And according to reports, the new forum is established as one of several commitments that will be signed by Kyiv's allies.
Welcome to this first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. This is truly a historic moment, allies and Ukraine sitting side by side as equals to address our common vision of Euro-Atlantic security. And I'm really honored to welcome in our midst our dear friend Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. Welcome to you, Volodymyr. It's great to have you here.
The move, which is seen as NATO's efforts to bring Ukraine as close as possible to the alliance without actually joining it. The NATO chief reiterated that at the moment, the most urgent task for Western allies is to support Ukraine's war efforts against Russia. Despite all this, and the summit communique saying that, quote, Ukraine's future is in NATO, it did not set a timetable for Ukraine to join the alliance. Now, according to the communique, NATO will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when, quote, allies agree and conditions are met. Interestingly, the West has maintained its as long as it takes approach. It has not shied away once from showing its support. But on paper, NATO has been divided over Ukraine's membership. Ukraine's largest Western allies are still finalizing a joint framework that will pave the way for long-term security assurances for Kyiv. The United States and Germany are wary of any move that might take the alliance closer to war with Russia. So for Ukraine, the ongoing war continues to be the big hurdle as it pushes its bid to become part of the alliance. Okay, well, for more on this, we are now being joined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow from St. Petersburg. Doctorow is an international affairs analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, and welcome back. It seems a little premature for Ukraine to ask to join NATO when it's in the middle of a war with Russia. What are your thoughts?
It's not in the middle of a war with Russia. It's close to the end of a war with Russia, a war that is losing. Today's announcements by Stoltenberg and by others at the NATO meeting in Vilnius may fool some commentators at CNN or Euronews, but they shouldn't fool your audience. The fact is that the counteroffensive that received massive support in equipment and training from NATO countries, that Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed miserably. The latest figures that we have is that 26,000 Ukrainian soldiers and officers were killed or taken out of action on the counteroffensive against Russia in the last 30 days. They have lost hundreds of tanks. They have lost most of the advanced military equipment supplied to them by NATO countries in the preceding weeks. Mr. Zelensky may have used his opportunity as a speaker in the NATO meeting to berate NATO for not taking him in. But the fact is, the precondition for any admittance to NATO was that he would have a successful counteroffensive using the vast resources he had been given to effect. He didn't. In fact, as of yesterday, the Russians have now gone on a counteroffensive, and they have in one day taken on one of the fronts 1.5 kilometers of territory that was held by Mr. Zelensky's forces. This, despite the fact that in the preceding 30 days of Ukraine's counteroffensive, they moved a few meters here and there forward. So the result is a disastrous Ukrainian counteroffensive, the start of a new offensive by the Russians, and the Ukrainian manpower reserves are depleted. The West can supply all of the equipment it wishes to Ukraine, but Ukraine no longer has the manpower to use it and to wage a successful war. In recent days, we understand that the United States is giving little signals that it is going to push Ukraine into negotiations with Russia to end the war. The signals came from Jake Sullivan speaking to reporters when he accompanied President Biden on his way to Europe for the meeting in Vilnius. It was unequivocal. For the first time in months, Russia was not spoken of in hostile terms. President Putin was not reviled and cursed. They were taking very neutral language about Russia, which is the most obvious signal that the United States is ready to negotiate. And that is the end of the whole issue. Negotiations, for as far as Russia is concerned, mean one thing. Territorial boundaries are not the important issue. Ukraine becoming neutral, it's no longer not only having no NATO alliance, but its inability to maintain any foreign troops or institutions on its territory. That will be the non-negotiable Russian demand for any peace. And with that, NATO goes out the window.
Yeah. Well, we'll see whether NATO goes out the window or not. We'll be watching very closely. But I just to follow up on what you were saying, it's very interesting to read between the lines also for the one fact that we never hear NATO or the United States talk about Ukraine's victory moving forward. They usually talk about how even providing weapons ultimately is so Ukraine would have the upper hand in negotiations with Russia. And now we hear that the United States wants to provide cluster munitions. And then there's that deal with the F-16s. We'll see where that goes. So can you talk about that? Do you think that with everything that Ukraine has, it will be in a better position to negotiate with Russia? Not to mention the fact that Ukraine says that Russia needs to pull out all of its troops from Ukraine, including Crimea.
Well, but Ukraine entered into the counterattack under massive pressure from the United States and other NATO countries to prove that their investment in Ukraine was justified. But and for that reason, they proceeded prematurely in a counter-offensive, so to speak, when they had no air cover. According to all normal military doctrine, that was fated to fail. To do what they wanted to do, you had to have air cover. They didn't have it. And to say that they're going to get F-16s in early next year, there won't be Ukraine to talk about early next year if this war continues. The Russians will continue moving till they reach the Polish border unless the Ukrainians agree to be a neutral country without NATO. But let's turn to one other question that came up in your introduction to this interview, and that was Mr. Zelensky speaking with great gratitude that various NATO members are going to give bilateral security agreements to protect Ukraine. This is a substitute for NATO. Let's be clear about one thing. The United States cannot do that. The United States Congress will not approve giving security guarantees to Ukraine. And without the United States giving the security guarantee, all of the other member countries of NATO or outside of NATO in the G7 who may want to give security guarantees to Ukraine, they're worthless. It's only the American guarantee that has any validity, and the United States absolutely will not and cannot give such a guarantee.
Mr. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us and for your thorough insight on the situation. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon, and of course, we'll be watching these developments very closely.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, the British Defense Secretary suggests that Ukraine needs to put more emphasis on saying thank you for Western help when he was asked about President Volodymyr Zelensky's complaints that the country has not been issued a firm timetable or set of conditions for joining NATO. Now, it's important to note that it was Mr. Wallace, the Defense Secretary of Britain, that was hoping to be at the helm of NATO, taking Stoltenberg's place. However, when Rishi Sunak met with President Biden, he wasn't able to convince the U.S. president in this regard. So with this backdrop, we are now joined by our correspondent, Alex Izat from London. Alex, how do you see Wallace's statement? Is there some unease over Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's stance?
Yeah, it does quite feel that there has been a lot of talk from Zelensky recently about how it was absurd that Ukraine couldn't join NATO and that he was frustrated about how slow things were moving. So when Ben Wallace made those complaints, he was suggesting that actually, the UK has given about $83 billion worth of equipment over to Ukraine. So Zelensky should be a little bit more grateful for what he has already received. Obviously, we just heard there in the press conference that Volodymyr Zelensky was very thankful. He thanked a lot of people, including Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, for his help. But it does feel that he is getting to a bit more irritable as this war continues on. He has said previously that he thinks by joining NATO that the war with Russia will end. However, there are many that say, well, it would push Putin to do something even more drastic. And a lot of the G7 countries are not willing to take that chance of potentially start another world war. So, of course, Zelensky is going to be extremely frustrated. But it does seem from what Ben Wallace was suggesting, and others also, that maybe he needs to take a little bit of a step back and be grateful for what he has received so far. This current advice that he's been given from the G7 and through NATO is that they will ensure that he is secure and the country is still having the support from those G7 countries, but that it will have to wait before he joins NATO. And that is something that we did all expect. And whether or not Zelensky did try to throw his toys out of the pram a little bit earlier this week by suggesting it was absurd that Ukraine couldn't join, I think Ben Wallace it was right to say something in the sense that, well, actually, the UK has been behind Ukraine since the beginning, and we are still behind the people, and it's not right for the leader to potentially throw that out alongside his complaints about the management of NATO.
Yeah, it seems that Mr. Wallace said the quiet part out loud, what many have been thinking. But on the other hand, people say that Volodymyr Zelensky is in war. It's his country. He can ask for whatever he wants. It's up to the opposing side, the other side, to see what they can provide and what they can't. Alex, thank you so much for joining us from London. Alex Izat, our correspondent, joining us live. Charles Manson, the American cult head who terrorized Los Angeles in 1969, is back in the news because a member of the so-called Manson family has been released from jail. Leslie Van Houten was only 19 years old when she followed Manson's orders and went on a killing spree. After conviction, she spent 53 years behind bars. In May, a California appeals court overruled the California governor and found Van Houten was entitled to parole. After the ruling, California Governor Gavin Newsom stopped denying parole to her. She is the first from the Manson family to receive parole after being convicted for 7 murders. Van Houten has now left the South California prison on parole, and reports say she's presently at a confidential location where she will spend 1 year. One of the biggest mysteries in the world, and the question is whether or not we are alone in the universe. Are there other intelligent beings looking up into the night from a different planet or universe and asking the same questions about us? Well, we might have found the answer. Check out this story to find out more about how alien technology could be lurking not up in the sky, but deep into the sea.
It's an eternal quest, the hunt for life outside planet Earth. We have been looking into the vastness of the universe. We have been analyzing thousands of galaxies and their inhabitants, trying to understand the nature of our cosmos. And more importantly, whether life exists beyond planet Earth. It is one of the most profound questions of all time. But what if we were looking at the wrong places? Hollywood has hinted about it. How aliens have been visiting our planet. But look no further. An astrophysicist claims to have made a significant advancement in the quest for extraterrestrial life. Professor Avi Loeb thinks he may have discovered pieces of alien technology from a meteor that crashed in 2014 off the coast of Papua New Guinea. In 2014, a fireball blazed across the sky above Papua New Guinea, shedding debris as it passed. A US government sensor measured its speed at more than 177,000 kilometers per hour. Based on the extreme speed and its trajectory upon entry into Earth's atmosphere, Loeb believes the object is a relic from another star system. Now, hundreds of tiny magnetic spheres shed by the extraterrestrial visitor are being extracted from beneath the Pacific Ocean. What makes them curious is its composition and structure. The minuscule orbs made of iron, magnesium and titanium that may be pieces of the meteor. Scientists are trying to understand if the spherules are artificial or natural. There is both pushback and praise from the larger scientific community. And we would like to wait a little more before concluding if the spheres were made using alien technology, something which would change many definitions and broaden our horizons.
Now to the world of showbiz. Looks like the long-standing dispute between the children of singer Aretha Franklin is now settled. A jury has decided that the handwritten document found on Franklin's couch is indeed a valid will. Celebrated singer Aretha Franklin passed away in 2018. It was believed that the singer did not leave behind a formal will when she passed away at 76. But in 2019, a document dated 2010 was discovered in a cabinet at the Queen of Souls home in Detroit, Michigan. Shortly after, another handwritten document dated 2014 was found in a notebook on Franklin's couch. Kel Franklin and Edward Franklin, who have teamed up against their brother Ted White II, argued that the papers dated 2014 should override the 2010 document. Ted, meanwhile, favored the 2010 will and said that it was much more significant. The jury has now ruled that the document found on Aretha Franklin's couch make for a valid will in Michigan. Kel Franklin reacted to the legal win, and I quote, "I think that it's a great thing. I think that she would be very happy. She's proud right now that her wishes have been adhered to," end of quote. While both versions appear to indicate that Franklin's 4 sons would share income from music and copyright, there are a few differences between the two wills. Under the 2014 will, Kelf and grandchildren would inherit his mother's Bloomfield Hills home. Meanwhile, the 2010 will had a provision that Kelf and Edward must take business classes and a certification degree to benefit from the estate. But this condition is not present in the latter document. Thank you so much for staying with us and watching WION Live Broadcast from New York. I'm Susan Tehrani. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Meanwhile, don't go away. A lot more news coming up only on WION. World is One.
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at yowan.com.
Hi, I'm Alison LaGrange, and you're watching E-Club.
Here are the nominees for Achievement in Music.
People are totally wrong to keep telling me that, oh, you're a multitasker. I'm not.
Awards and fashion shows are in full swing.
Seeing a young, black man, directing a feature film, I saw myself in him.
Engage with us. Let us know what you'd like to see on the show and celebrities that you'd like us to feature.
After the collapse of the Kherson Dam and the deluge caused, fighting intensifies between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. As the much talked about Ukrainian counter-offensive seems to be getting underway, France, Germany and Poland firm up talks on the security guarantees Ukraine desperately needs. All eyes are now on NATO